Anita Moncrief is a senior trainer and curriculum manager for the Grassroots Leadership Academy, GLA, with over 14 years of experience in advocacy and issue-based community organizing. She is an advisory board member of the Black Conservatives Fund. Anita Moncrief has spent years as a political consultant and trainer for a number of national nonprofits and is working with GLA to create a unique training program centered on liberty-minded values and hands-on community organizing. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Anita Moncrief.
Hello, I'm glad to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about relationship building and how to engage the head, the heart, and the hands. Most of the time, when people think about organizing, they think about going out into the community and working on their issues, but people don't really understand that organizing is a craft, it's an art. It's an art of leadership and relationship building. Ernesto Cortez says that organizing is a fancy word for relationship building. So let's talk about that. What does that mean? When you're out there organizing, you have to understand that you're trying to accomplish a certain goal, and it's about building power. And when we say power, most people get a little bit nervous talking about power because they think of control. They think of negative forms of power, and that is what we call power over, and that usually means government, police, elected officials, anyone that is blocking us from getting the resources that we have to mobilize in our community. But there's another type of power, and that's power within. That's the inner power. That's the strength. That's the power that we have that makes us want to go out there and make a difference. When you take that power and you multiply it by the people, you get collective power or power with. And that's the people power. That's the grassroots. That's the power that changes the world. And the only way that you can build that is by building relationships. So, what does that mean? That means shared values, shared resources, learning from each other, and having a sense of community and commitment. A lot of times we go out there as activists and we say, you should be upset about this, you should get involved. And people don't realize that in order to motivate people, we have to connect those issues to why it matters to them. Why should they care? Why should they knock on that door? Why should they sign your petition? And that's exactly what relationship building does. You have to be able to build the foundation, and you do that by one on one meetings. Marshall Gantz, a professor at Harvard University, developed a strategy that was used during the 2008 Obama campaign that focused on house meetings, one on one relationships, organizational meetings, and team meetings. We'll talk a little bit about each one of those and see how not only did it build a movement around a man, but it built a movement that was able to survive an election and lead to 365 organizing, or the permanent organizing campaign, which is the Obama model. So they always say that you may never, sorry, I'm a little nervous today, guys. They may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. That was Carl Brunner. And what he meant by that is it's not what you talk about the issues. It's not the facts, the figures, the numbers, the percentages. It's how you connect those issues back to shared values. So when you're out there organizing, you have to think about the way you say things. It's all about not using the buzzwords. So if you believe in free market or constitution or whatever, those are buzzwords. What does that mean? What does it mean to organize in your community? If I work on criminal justice reform, I'm doing it because it affects the economy. It affects the people that are incarcerated. It affects their families. It affects the communities when they come back out. It affects the jobs. All of these things are why it matters to me. So when I connect my values to the person that I'm talking to, we're engaging in something called the head, the heart, and the hands. The head is your logic. That's your strategy. That's, what the issue is, who it affects, why should someone get involved. But the heart is why it matters to that person. How does your issues and your values connect to that person and what they're doing? Why should they stop, taking time with their family, going out there and doing the things they do in order to organize and actually get out there and do action? Once you engage the head and the heart, then you get the hands. And the hands is your action. That's how you get people to turn their emotions, their shared values into action. But there is a strategy to that. And part of those is listening first. When you go out there, it's not about taking your issues and putting them in front of people. It's about asking them what matters to them. When I worked at Acorn, we had this thing where we would go out into the communities and we would ask people, what are the issues? What's going on? What do you want to change? So let's say they said, you know what, we need a stop sign. People are speeding through our neighborhoods and we're worried that they're going to run over our kids. So then Acorn would mobilize the neighborhood and they would fight for a stop sign. Once they got that stop sign, not only were the people empowered, but Acorn was able to get street cred because they said, oh, they did something for us. They did something that made a difference. And the next issue campaign, the next thing was even more easier for them to mobilize. So the question that you have to ask yourself, what is your stop sign? When you go into those communities and you listen to people, you're listening for their issues. Like I'm a mom. So if you ask me what I care about, I'm going to start talking about education and my child. So all of a sudden, you know that if you're working on school choice or whatever, you can engage me. Or I will start talking about some of the things I do in my free time. I like to do art. So, oh, now you know that you could plug me into your action because I can help you do signs and other creative things. So, we're listening for cues. We're listening to find out what resources that person has, that inner power that can connect to the resources that we have, our inner power, and make collective power. It's all about building the people because the people equal power. Grassroots and organizing is all about getting your people together. Sometimes people will think, it's just about talking about issues that matter to you, but it's also about looking for self-interest. Saul Alinsky was a genius in this. Saul Alinsky understood that if you find a person's self-interest, then you're much more able to, relate it to why it matters to them. So you're looking for those keywords, understanding a person's self-interest, understanding their values, and understanding how to connect your values to their values. That's how you get action. That's how you get people to gain commitment. Because if I don't know you and you come and knock on my door and you say, Anita, I want you to come out to this action. I want you to get involved. I don't know who you are. I don't know why I should care about what you're doing. But if you take the time to build the relationship and you tell me, hey, I want you to come out on Saturday and knock doors with me between 10 and 2, and then afterwards we're going to go have pizza, then I know what to expect. I know what you want out of me, and you've taken the time to build the relationship. So when that Saturday comes and I'm in bed and I'm looking around and there's my dog and he wants to go out and play, I will get up out of bed and go because I made a commitment to you. I built a relationship with you around an issue. Marshall Gantz calls those public relationships, and those start with intentional, strategic conversations. That means one on one meetings. One on one meetings are where you meet a person that you think will be a part of your leadership team. Leadership teams are comprised of people that you have identified as collaborators, people that can help you advance your issue. Oftentimes, we think that being a leader means taking charge, and it doesn't. Being a leader means being able to inspire others to achieve a shared purpose in the face of uncertainty. So if you're inspiring others, then you're telling your story, what Marshall Gantz calls a public narrative to these people. The public narrative is your story of self, why it matters to you, the story of us, why it matters to them, the shared values, and the story of now, which is your action. Once you understand that by doing that call to action at the end, you have connected your reasons for being there to their reasons for being there. So it's basically, we can work together. How can we make that change? So when you have these strategic conversations, with these one-on-one conversations, let me say, then basically what you're doing is you're listening more than you're talking. You're looking for the clues we talked about earlier, and then you're understanding at the end you have to make that strategic ask. The ask has to be, if it's a new relationship, then it's a commitment to continue building the relationship. If it's something that you've been working on, now it's time to ask to plug that person into the movement. A lot of times people get stuck on this part. They can do the relationship building, they can make the connections, but they're uncomfortable making the ask. What we have to understand is that all they can do is say no. All they can do is say, I'm not sure. And at that point, you know that you have to continue to build that relationship. Organizing takes heart. It takes the ability to get the no's, to get the letdowns, to the losses, and to be able to pick yourself back up and keep fighting again. So when you're engaging the head, the heart, and the hands, it also relies on you having the heart to continue to do this. What that means is that you have accepted the responsibility of leadership, the responsibility of enabling others to achieve a shared purpose in the face of uncertainty. So Marshall Gans teaches us that those emotions always translate into action, but there are certain inhibitors there. One of them being apathy. Apathy is when people feel like their vote doesn't matter, that their voice doesn't matter. And the cure for apathy is anger. And now, when I say anger, I don't mean rage. I mean outrage, righteous indignation, that feeling of injustice, that frustration that we can do something, that what we call ICMAD. ICMAD is YCMAD. That means you can make a difference. People have to understand that they can translate their fear of apathy, isolation, fear, inertia into tangible actions through connecting those emotions to something that is actually positive. But a lot of times we get stuck in the apathy and the anger. So, what we're going to talk about today is a couple of techniques for how to engage the head, heart, and hands. The number one is the story. When you're telling your story, you have to give a little bit of yourself. You have to be able to say, you know what? I can be vulnerable. I can put myself out there. I can tell why this matters to me. I can tell a story about, sometimes I tell a story about my sister. She's over in Australia, but when she comes to visit us, she's into climate change. And so she washes our dishes, but she won't rinse them out because she feels like, she's got to save water. So if I'm drinking my coffee, there's bubbles floating to the top, and she tells me it's okay. This usually makes people laugh because then I talk about our arguments of being on two different sides of the aisle, but being able to find a common ground. So, depending on your audience, it depends on what stories that you tell. Once you figure out how to tell your stories, the next thing is to identify leaders. Leaders. Organizing is all about identifying leaders, educating them on the issues, that's the head and the heart, and then motivating them to action, that's the hands. Now, organizing and mobilizing are two different things. Organizing is identifying your base, educating them on the issues. Mobilizing is taking those shared values and turning them into action. And that's how you get power. You can't have organizing without mobilizing, and you can't mobilize before you've organized the people and gotten them ready for the action. So, what you have to think about is what matters to you? What matters to me? Can we work together? And then you have to figure out who are my people? What are their issues, and how can we solve those issues and turn those resources that we have into power? That goes back to understanding the head, the heart, and the hands, going into the communities, talking to the people, telling them what matters to you, figuring out what matters to them, and then connecting those values. So I think that the best thing that people can do is to understand that organizing is all about relationship building. If you don't have that foundation, then you're not going to get the commitment that you need for tangible action. You will always be stuck in having to start over again because every time it gets hard, the people that don't have a commitment to you and the cause will go home because it's a barrier. And not everyone has the heart for organizing. Not everyone has the heart to be a leader, but understanding that not only are you enabling others to achieve a purpose in the face of uncertainty, but you are also taking the responsibility to motivate others, to keep things going, to get to that end, to get to that win. And sometimes that takes not only being a leader, but being a follower as well. Now, I'm going to open it up now for the questions, but I'm really excited about the fact that we're finally moving into a stage where people across the country are getting together and they're sharing their stories and they're realizing that the relationships will eventually equal the power that they need. Thank you.
Fantastic, Anita. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Very important information, of course, from somebody who is certainly experienced in these areas. And yes, we do have some questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is, as activist leaders, we often have real constraints on our time. We've heard from one side that limiting your time, making yourself less available to other activists, and otherwise limiting your time with people is the best way to keep from going insane. On the other hand, several people have told us that the importance of answering every email with care, having long phone conversations, and otherwise taking a significant amount of time to build relationships with everyone, from fellow activists to grassroots volunteers. How do you balance your managing that?
Well, I think the best thing is to understand that there are public relationships and private relationships. Your public relationships are these intentional, strategic conversations that you're going to have, and you have to build them the same way that you would build your private friendships and other relationships. But I honestly feel that when you're an organizer, and I hate to say this, you're a professional friend. You have to put in the time talking to the people. And what happens is not only does it build the relationships, but it builds a support network that will help you in times of burnout. It's much easier to be out there fighting with a group that can help you when things go wrong than to be out there by yourself and to feel like you're fighting against the world. So I always encourage as much interaction as possible because you need that when times get rough. You need that when people attack the organization, your cause, or your issue. But at the same time, you have to understand that having a smaller core leadership team of maybe about 5 people will lead for you to be able to have someone to lean on. So you don't always have to interact with the entire movement that you're building, but you still need to be able to have that core team that can break off and interact with their segments. It's called the snowflake leadership model.
Fantastic. That's great information. I'm going to change it a little bit, something that you're familiar with. And of course, people know that you are a whistleblower as well. And this question is geared towards that, if I may.
Okay.
We have a problem with organizational accountability and activism. This is written by Daniel Johnson, actually, from Solutions Institute.
Okay.
And he has personally spoken to several people inside corrupt activist organizations who are fearful of blowing the whistle on them. What types of advice would you have for a would-be whistleblower? For example, what was the process and how did you decide to blow the whistle on Acorn, for example?
Well, that was a long process blowing the whistle on Acorn, but first I started noticing things. And the more I started noticing things, I started to put things together. And that means that I collected a lot of documents and information and things that I felt like would be needed later. I didn't know at the time what I was going to do with it. I didn't even think that I would be a whistleblower, but the situation opened up for me. But I would say keeping your eyes open, never letting your credibility or your reputation be compromised. That was actually my breaking point. Acorn gave me the Obama donor list and wanted me to contact their maxed out presidential donors. This was in violation of IRS rules, in violation of FEC. And that was the moment where I realized that the more I stayed there, not only was I complicit in all of this, but I was just as guilty as the other people because I knew everything and I was turning a blind eye. So make sure that you're collecting information. Make sure that if any emails, conversations, or anything where you're asked to do anything illegal, that all needs to be documented. And it's best to have the legal advice of a trusted lawyer. I have a lawyer on retainer that advised me the whole time I was going through the process because I was sued for $5 million. So make sure you're protecting yourself. Make sure you're not doing anything illegal when you're collecting the information. One of the things that saved me is that all the information that I had was information that was related to my job, but it was enough to expose the corruption within Acorn.
Fantastic. Discussing a little bit more, and by the way, I commend your bravery and your process
Thank you.
as well. To getting back a little bit more about the relationships, this is coming from Ted Metz. Do you have any tips on what sort of questions to ask to establish a relationship and trust really fast? Get to a point where you can have that relationship status and go in activism.
I think the best thing is to be upfront about what you want. What you want when you go into these one-on-one conversations. Say, you know what? I've been noticing that you're doing a lot of work in the community, and I would like to talk to you about it. Once you set up the conversation and you are actually there, ask the person why they got involved. What made them feel like they had to work on the issue and what's their background with the issue. And get them to start talking about themselves. Once you do that, make sure that you take a chance to point out as they're telling you their story where your values connect with their stories. Or if someone tells you, well, my father inspired me to activism. He worked, hard for this country, and one of your relatives or like my grandfather was in the military, and I would say, you know what, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I was always taught to love America. So you connect those shared values almost immediately, but you're usually depending on the person able to gauge as the conversation goes along the level of commitment that you can get. Most of the time, it's also good to let that person know that you want to collaborate with them as a leader, that you're looking for them to help you lead and to bring more people in. Those are the best ways to get that commitment. And then once you get the commitment, don't be afraid to do what we call the catapult. The catapult is where you say, okay, you've agreed to come out and work with me. Do you think you can bring three friends? So all of a sudden, it's taking it from them being a participant to having a position of responsibility, and they're helping you with the event. Once you start doing that, it's a gradual increase of the responsibility until that person feels like they have owned your issue because it's their issue as well.
Fantastic. As you were talking earlier, this is a question for me. I noticed when you were offering some educational tidbits or inspirations on informational side, that your information came from a broad spectrum of, how would you say it, ideology.
Yes.
And my question is to you is, from the standpoint of relationship building, how important is it to approach what you've learned yourself objectively and to how to be transpartisan from a coalition standpoint?
It is very important. When I was developing curriculum for my employer, Americans of Prosperity, I was talking about that very thing. That one of the things that we have to do is understand that when you look at, and I'll just give you an example, Charles Koch, the Koch Institute. They're working with the ACLU, the NAACP, the Urban League, and a host of other organizations on criminal justice reform. Most people think that these would be unlikely bedfellows, but the issue is more important than those dynamics. On the left, they call this solidarity. They work together on a lot of issues because they understand that by coming together where they can find common ground, this issue may be important, and then they can break off into their individual silos if they disagree. But I always come at it from, we have so much to learn from each other. We have so many things that are out there that we're not connecting on, and part of it is because we're divided as a country. As Lincoln said, a house divided cannot stand. So if we're going to be effective with any issue, we need to make our messaging and our approach something that can reach people that may not traditionally agree with us, who may see that we have a point because we're coming at it from that nonpartisan stance.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And it sounded like that was the approach that you were using, and it is much appreciated because, from my standpoint, what you're talking about is talking to your neighbors, as you were mentioning, going around neighborhoods. So thank you so much for that.
Thank
And
you.
lastly, just as we're getting ready to wind up, we have a few more minutes. What is the most important thing you want to say to our audience about trying to make change that is better for themselves? Just cover whatever you feel is that you're most passionate about. What do we need to do as a society?
I think as a society, we have to talk to each other. So right now we're talking at each other. People have let their feelings get in the way of their political feelings, get in the way of relationship building. What I see all of the time, especially on my Facebook page, where I have a lot of friends that are still on the far left, and I happen to be more right leaning now, they will defriend me or back away because of politics. We're all humans. We all live in this world. And if we love America, we have to realize that there's one thing we have to do. We cannot organize out of fear. When you organize out of fear, you are pushing out. It's because you're afraid of them taking away of something. You're afraid of whatever. But when you organize out of love, you are pulling in. And it's because you love this country. It's because you love the values, you love its people. And that is the only way we're going to be successful. Martin Luther King taught us that you cannot meet hate with hate. You cannot meet anger with anger. And right now in our country, we are so divided and angry that we're not being effective, and we're putting ourselves in a position where we're going to have a break between left, right, black, white, and it's all because there are some forces out there that want to keep us divided. If you want to be effective, organize out of love, listen to people, find common ground, and don't go into things with preconceived ideas and notions because people will surprise you.
Well, that is a fantastic summation, and I appreciate you coming on to Acon 3. We all appreciate you coming on to Acon 3, Anita. Look forward to working with you in the future, establishing a relationship with you. Thank you so much for coming on today.
You have a great day. Thank you.